Alright, guys, we are back with another installment of Political Tales of Adventure, and we are reading from the book 50 Political Ideas You Really Need to Know. And today we are going to read number 8, which is Tyranny. So let's begin. In the course of more than 2,500 years, the use of the word tyranny has taken on so much unsavory baggage that it is now firmly established in the lexicon of political rhetoric. As a term of abuse in political debate or attack, it readily conjures up a picture of oppressive and arbitrary government. As is often the case with such rhetoric, fine distinctions in meaning are blurred, usually deliberately. Indeed, in this polemical use, tyranny is hardly distinguishable from its close cousins, despotism and dictatorship. When in 1940, in the lowest point of the Second World War, Winston Churchill denounced Hitler's Germany as a monstrous tyranny, never surpassed in the dark, lamentable catalogue of human crime. He doubtless wished to call to mind a host of unpleasant characteristics, including the harshness of the Nazi leader's rule and the illegality of the manner in which he had acquired it. The Greeks and tyranny. The latter meaning of tyrant, that of usurper or one who illegally seizes power within a state, is close to its original meaning. In the Greek age of tyrants, the word tyrannical described, initially at least, the means by which political power was acquired. It was neutral with both respect to the character of the ruler and to the quality of his rule. Indeed, many of the early Greek tyrants were regarded with affection as champions of the people, of the many and the poor against the few and the rich, as it was commonly put. Best known of the early tyrants was Pisistratus of Athens, and he was fondly remembered for his prosperous and law-abiding period of rule, a golden age in which the city flourished and became a cultural center renowned throughout Greece. A number of later tyrants, however, including Pisistratus' own sons, were not so enlightened. Over time, as they increasingly abused their power, the image of tyranny deteriorated, and the stain became indelible in the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, who were in agreement that the tyrant was the very worst form of ruler. Tyranny appears in Aristotle's influential classification of the types of political constitution, which is based on two criteria: the number of people who rule and whose interest they rule. Within this system, tyranny appears as the corrupt or deviant version of monarchy, and a tyrant is a ruler who rules in his own interest. Many of the points that Aristotle makes about tyranny are made by comparing and contrasting it with the concept of despotism, which the Greeks regarded as characteristically asteic form of government. While despotism, like tyranny, is most strongly opposed to liberty, which the Greeks themselves liked, there are several important points of contrast. First, a despot, however all-encompassing with his power, rules in accordance with the existence of law and is thus some stance constitutionally established. A tyrant, by contrast, seizes control and rules arbitrarily on the basis of his own will and whim. As a consequence, the subjects of a despotism can be said to cede power willingly, and therefore cannot be described as being coerced or ruled by force, unlike those living beneath a tyrant. They tacitly consent to the system of government in which they live, and thus do not act under influence of fear. It is for this reason that despotisms, unlike tyrannies, are typically long-lasting and stable, and are not marked by problems of succession. The idea that tyranny consists in an individual group or acting illegally, first in the acquisition of power and then in its use, has persisted in subsequent characterizations. This has sometimes been elaborated into the view that thirst for power is the tyrant's original motivation, and that the exercise of power, unrestrained by the rule of law, is the ultimate cause of his corruption. In an address to the House of Lords in 1770, William Pitt the Elder, echoing a sentiment expressed earlier by John Locke, observed that unlimited power is apt to corrupt the minds of those who possess it. And this I know, my lords, that where law ends, tyranny begins. And that was expressed earlier by John Locke in 1960, and he said, wherever law ends, tyranny begins. So, in the fact of its operation without restraint of law, tyranny is largely indistinguishable from dictatorship, at least as conceived in modern times. Modern autocrats, from Napoleon to Stalin and Hitler, who rose to power in part through personal charisma and claimed legitimacy by appeal to the popular will, were denounced by their opponents indiscriminately as actors and tyrants. As dictators and tyrants. The usual orientation of tyranny towards power is exposed by English writer George Orwell in 1984. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The peculiar, The peculiar horrors and sheer scale of 20th century tyrannies prompted some to the view that they differed not merely in degree, but in kind from earlier regimes, and therefore required a new terminology. The name totalitarianism was first coined with reference to the fascist dictatorship of Mussolini's Italy, then applied to Nazi Germany. After the war, following the defeat of Germany and Italy, it became a term in the rhetoric of the Cold War liberals and was used almost exclusively with reference to the Soviet Union under Stalin. Certainly, the scale of ambition of these regimes to control and direct every aspect of individual and social behavior sets them apart from anything that had gone before. Typically, the apparatus of state was highly centralized around a single party under a single charismatic leader, and an elaborate, technologically sophisticated bureaucracy was developed to manage social and economic activity and to coordinate the secret police and other agencies used to monitor, terrorize, and eliminate dissidents, real or imagined. What was perhaps the most distinctive about the Nazi and Soviet systems was the extent to which ideology was used in reaction to the supposed decadence of liberal democracy in an attempt to bring about a utopian transformation of society. Be that as it may, the picture of total, all-embracing state control, infusing every sphere of life, was itself part of totalitarian mythology, mediated through propaganda and censorship. The actual effectiveness of the total state, and even its existence as such, have been seriously questioned in the recent decades. So that's it for the chapter. I think it was good. A lot of big words, a lot of stuff I got to go back and look up and figure out, what the heck he was saying. But I think it's interesting how he starts off talking about, how was the origins of the word and how it really was just like a verb. It wasn't really a positive or a negative. It was just like a verb, and now it's just a negative descriptor and a negative all-around thing, which, for good reason. And I think it's a little interesting that he brought up George Orwell in 1984 because, we have talked about the author before, and he's not really, doesn't seem like he's that crazy of a liberal, doesn't seem like he's that crazy of a Republican, seems like he's just kind of a guy. We'll see. I mean, definitely has his own opinion, but from looking up his stuff, he seems to be fair about it. So it's interesting they brought that up, and then at the end, ending with the Nazi and Soviet systems and how they, you know, how they use American democracy is like, oh, look at these, like, you know, Americans or whatever. It just reminds me of North Korea and Russia right now. How, you know, North Korea, all you know, all these Trump, you know, so Fire and Fury and all this other stuff. I mean, they must have eaten that up. You know, it's like, oh, look at this crazy monkey screaming about Fire and Fury and all this other crazy shit. It's like, come on, you guys want this guy to be, you know, finger on the button? Come on, fucking go North Korea, baby, Team North Korea. So, you know, think that's pretty good. So that's it. You know, chapter 8, tyranny. Yeah.